Are the Abraham Accords setting up the Gog of Magog war? Is it also setting up the release of the four horsemen? And is it part of the covenant with death discussed in Isaiah 28? Wow, for something that will be heralded as a giant step toward world peace. It sounds like it will actually bring global catastrophe. So how can this be? How can these things be related? And this is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and we first reported on this back in 2020 when the Abraham Accords were first signed, but it's time we refresh our understanding of the link between these agreements and prophecy, because obviously so much more has happened since then, especially like in the last month. When we think of the Abraham Accords, we usually envision alliances, nations coming together. That's undoubtedly what Trump and the UN are preaching, but I want to stress today that it's more likely to form two factions, not a unified group of nations, but two groups that will eventually set up what the Bible describes in Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Gog of Magog war. Now, you have probably read Ezekiel 38 for yourself and have seen the list of nations that come against Israel. The two prominent ones are Turkey, which is probably Magog, Meshach, and Tubal, and Iran, but the Bible refers to as Persia. If you also include their proxy states, Syria for Turkey, and Hezbollah, Iraq, and Gaza for Iran, this forms a whole northern tier of nations that are above Israel. What about the southern tier of nations like Saudi Arabia and Egypt? And what about Qatar, which you might call Qatar? So you can see the Middle East is divided into north and south by the Gog of Magog alliance that's going to form in the future. The northern nations join the Gog alliance, the southern apparently don't. This gives those of us who trust our scriptures an insight into the future that neither Trump nor the UN has. And today, we're taking a really deep dive thanks to our advisory board who helped with this video. When the Abraham Accords were announced in August 13, 2020, they weren't just about Israel and the UAE normalizing relationships. They thought they were establishing a model, a multinational alliance of peace, trade, security guarantees, and in the years since then, one nation after another, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and now discussions involving Saudi Arabia, Oman, Indonesia, and even some African states have aligned under this umbrella. It's a framework involving many nations. And if the coming expansion ties it directly to land division of Israel and protection guarantees for Israel, well, that's when prophetic alarm bells should start ringing in your head. And they have for many of you, but today we're going to give you a framework to help you understand how prophecy explains what's going to happen. If Israel is promised safety through international protection while agreeing to divide its land, well, then we're looking at the exact conditions Isaiah 28 in the covenant of death warned about. Here it is. You have said, we have made a covenant with death in which Sheol were in agreement. When the overflowing scourge passes through, it will not reach us. Isaiah describes a false sense of security. Israel's leaders trusting in a political covenant instead of trusting in God, which you also probably know echoes Paul's warning in 1 Thessalonians 5:3, while people are saying peace and safety, sudden destruction will come upon them. The preconditions for the Gog of Magog war in Ezekiel 38, 11 through 12, also requires that Israel is dwelling safely. Here it is. You will say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates, to take plunder and to take booty. So linking the two-state solution and the dividing of Israel to a Middle East-wide security agreement and mutual defense treaty backed by the UN and the USA is precisely what could fulfill the false sense of security Israel feels in Isaiah and in Ezekiel. What's very interesting, and I think Israel probably knows this, but it's something for us all to keep in mind. We're going to have a different president in the USA at the midpoint of the tribulation, and the UN may have different leadership. So, trusting in those two to protect you, you may not be trusting in the same people that will be controlling them in the future. So Isaiah 28, 14 through 15 calls this agreement a covenant with death. Why? Because Israel makes it, believing it will shield them from death and war. The overflowing scourge will not reach us, but God says otherwise. Your covenant with death will be annulled. Your agreement with Sheol will not stand. When the scourge passes through, you will be trampled down by it. In other words, they're not avoiding death. They're going right into it. That scourge may be the invasion of Ezekiel 38. So Isaiah's prophecy isn't just poetic justice. It's timeline. Peace is made, then peace is broken, then judgment is unleashed. So why is the peace broken? To understand this, we need to further understand the prophecy and the coming expansion of the Abraham Accords. Trump, Kushner, and the UN envision normalization of relations with Israel as a necessity for Middle East peace. They also envision the formation of an independent Palestinian state as necessary. So in 2026, it is likely we are going to see some kind of overarching agreement that includes these features. A two-state solution, internationally recognized borders for a Palestinian state, joint access of Jews and Muslims to the Temple Mount, and a regional defense pact, possibly with UN supervision. If they get all those things, the US and the UN are going to think they found the secret to peace. So the Western powers imagine this is going to work. What they overlook in all of this is the religious component. Muslims desire to remove Israel from the land entirely, as they imagine it to belong to their God, Allah. And for Israel to remain in the land, it means Allah was too weak to remove them. They can't have that. They're also desperate to keep Israel out of Jerusalem and off the Temple Mount, which is Islam's third holiest site. Add to this, the Islamic religion allows something known as taqiyya, which allows intentional lying to further the Muslim cause, and the idea that it's okay to break a treaty because Muhammad did it, something known as the Treaty of Hudna. Muhammad entered into a treaty with the Quraysh of Mecca. Later, the Quraysh violated the treaties, as at least some Muslim sources said they did. Others say that that's when Muhammad's forces became more powerful than the Quraysh, and the treaty was effectively ended, leading to the destruction of the Quraysh. This shows that termination was triggered by the other side's breach of conditions. Let's keep that in mind, as it will likely be involved in why the covenant with death does not stand, as Isaiah 28 tells us. Now, the original Abraham Accords created a southern alliance of Middle Eastern nations already, those who are friendly to Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and potentially in the future, Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, Turkey and Iran have remained firmly opposed to this Abraham Accord idea. And this division exactly mirrors Daniel 11's King of the North and the King of the South, as well as the Gog of Magog alliance. The northern bloc, led by Turkey and Iran, aligns with Ezekiel's list of Magog invaders. In contrast, the southern bloc, Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf states, lines up precisely with those not mentioned in Ezekiel's invasion. In other words, the Abraham Accords may be drawing some kind of prophetic battle line foretold in Scripture. This division also resurrects another pattern, really important one, the two bronze mountains of Zechariah 6. Nelson, what are you talking about? Well, in that chapter, Zechariah 6, the prophet saw 4 chariots pulled by colored horses, symbolic of the 4 colored horsemen of Revelation. And they were emerging from between 2 mountains of bronze. Okay, you say, Nelson, I heard you twice, but I still don't understand. Well, a mountain of bronze is a symbol. In the Bible, mountain is frequently a symbol of a kingdom, and bronze is the metal, making up the Greek Empire and Nebuchadnezzar's dream statue. Remember, it was gold, silver, bronze, and then iron. The Greek Empire encompassed all of the modern Middle East, from Turkey to Egypt. So these two mountains most likely symbolize two modern kingdoms or coalitions, a northern bloc led by Iran and Turkey, and the southern bloc formed through the Abraham Accords. If so, Zechariah's vision places the release of the four horsemen, false peace, war, famine, and death, after these two alliances form. Let me explain that one more time because I know it's confusing. The two mountains of bronze are a symbol of two kingdoms that encompass parts of Alexander's old empire. What we learn in Daniel 11 and in Magog of Magog account is that there will be a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. So that means the Abraham Accords aren't just political. They mark the trigger point for the unfolding of Revelation's seals. The king of the north will eventually sweep down like a whirlwind, Daniel 11:40, invading the very nations that thought they were safe under the Abraham Accord covenant. Just as Isaiah predicted, false peace collapses under the weight of divine judgment. In other words, the Abraham Accords might not end war. They may actually set the stage for the final one, World War III, the Gog of Magog War. So why do these two factions form? A king of the north and a king of the south. What is the most fractious issue in the Middle East? Well, the 39 acres of the Temple Mount. One faction is not willing to share the Temple Mount with Israel, apparently, whether they get the deal done or not, while the other is willing to share it if they get the deal done. Daniel 8, 9, and 11 all speak of the Antichrist stopping Jewish sacrifices on the Temple Mount and profaning the temple. 2 Thessalonians 2:4 speaks of the Antichrist taking over the holy place, a temple or temple substitute for himself. His focus is on eliminating Jewish worship from the Temple Mount and directing it to himself. Worship that will likely be restarted as part of the negotiations taking place right now. And who is most opposed to this Jewish worship? The northern countries of Iran, Hezbollah and Hamas, and Turkey and their leader Erdogan. So whether the northern tier of nations never join the Abraham Accords or if they break ties to it as a Treaty of Hudna, one way or the other, two factions are going to form. So what exactly happens then? Well, the northern tier invades Israel. This is described in numerous scriptures. In Ezekiel 38, the Gog of Magog section, we see the southern nations and the UN do nothing to stop the invasion. Sheba, which is either UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, or all of them. Dedan, which is Saudi Arabia, and the merchants of Tarshish, which is the Europeans in the UN, and all the young lions, well, maybe that could be the USA, will say to you, have you come to take plunder? That's what they're saying to Gog. Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to take great plunder? Well, it looks like Israel's allies do nothing to stop the invasion. They just ask some questions. And Israel then is overrun, the temple area desecrated, and the sacrifices stop. This brings up an important question. So where does all this lead? Daniel 9:27, a covenant is strengthened for 7 years. Isaiah 28, a false peace becomes a covenant with death and is added to the covenant. That's part of the strengthening. And then Ezekiel 38, an invasion against a secure and prosperous Israel. And we know how that ends. So the Abraham Accords may be the foundation. We don't know the exact day or the leader that's going to make all that happen. But prophecy gives us the pattern. Peace will be followed by sudden destruction. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. This brings up an important question. How do those sacrifices start on the Temple Mount? Because this seems to be the spark that ignites everything and makes that Northern Alliance angry. We'll click right here to keep watching and discover what it is that causes the sacrifices to begin. Is it a covenant? A false Messiah? Till then, this is Nelson. I'll see you there, and we'll discuss it.